All right, you pigskin passing pluckies. Welcome back to Carter Explains Football, starring me, Carter.
And me, also Carter.
Yeah, we decided that it would be easier for me to teach football to myself than anyone else, so we're both just going to be Carter now.
Yep, everybody's Carter.
Except he's Calum and I'm Carter. And this is a show where, much like Sisyphus, I hold out hope that maybe Boldy will stay up at the top of the hill this time, and I will look out on Tartarus with a smile on my face.
But I won't. That's your punishment.
Yeah, that's kind of it's the theme of it's the theme of the fable. Um, so for this episode, we're going to go through the AFC, the American Football Conference. But before we begin, there are a few basic things I realize I should have covered in our first episode, but
Hmm.
we can still talk about as the season is starting.
All right.
So in so here are a couple basic structure things for the NFL. So, an NFL season is 18 weeks. Each team plays 17 games, and they get one bye week where they don't play. Originally, it was for the last several decades, it was only 16 games, but they added an extra game. Last year was the first year, and basically everyone agrees too much football. We don't like this. The
Why?
season takes too long.
That's such a weird number.
Yes, that's also the problem. And I've talked about my obsession with symmetry. 16 is great because a team can go 8 and 8 and
Yeah.
9 and 7 or 10 and 6. Like it's clean numbers. The idea of a team going 10 and 7 makes me it's just gross. It looks gross. It doesn't look
Is
correct.
is it to like prevent there from being like not a tie, I guess, but to go 8-8? Like, is it so it's
No,
either they have a winning season or a losing season?
no, it literally is just because of money. It literally is just because the NFL is one of those organizations that is obsessed with keeping the line going up, where it's not just enough to make a lot of money, you have to keep making more money.
I thought
They
you have to
wanted 8.
hold the line.
No, that's the actual game or
Oh.
war. Um, so the NFL wanted 18 games. They're like, let's go whole hog, like 18. And the players union, um, basically, so the NFL does have a union, the Players Association, and they negotiate with the owners of all of the teams to decide the terms in which the season happens.
Hmm.
Like they decide sort of rules about contracts, how long the season will be, various rules and protocols to be put in place. And for a while, it looked like there was going to be a holdout over how many games there were going to be. And finally, the players caved and said, fine, we'll do 17 games now. And everyone kind of agrees. Well, not everyone agrees, because again, everyone still watches it, so it makes money. But yes, anyway, so now there are 17 games, and the playoffs are basically decided the winner. So in each conference, there are four divisions. Whoever wins their division gets to go to the playoffs automatically. Even if you have a losing record, if you did still have a better record than everyone else in your division, you get to go to the playoffs. And then there are three wild card teams. So basically, the playoffs are 14 teams, seven from each conference. That's also a thing they changed when they changed to 17 games. They originally it was six playoff teams. They added an extra wild card, and I'll talk about this a little bit as we talk about the AFC teams, but like it also seems like it was a mistake to add an extra playoff team because the last 2 years they've done this, it really has been like, oof, man, they're really sweating to get another team into the playoffs. But these
Mm.
teams are not good. And a part of that's bad luck, and a part of it is like, you know what? Maybe there aren't 14 good teams every season. Maybe half the league isn't good every year.
Maybe the wild card should be picked out of a hat,
Honestly, be
you
more
know?
interesting.
Because if it's a
Yeah,
wild card, you got to just make it like crazy.
yeah.
Like it could be the
Like
worst
basic
team in the league. Put them in there.
Right. That'd be more fun. Now, wildcard basically means, hey, here's a good team that had the misfortune of having another good team in their division. Like, for example, my team, the Buffalo Bills, our division is kind of trash right now. So,
Mm.
like, we don't really have to worry. We're going to make the playoffs. It's just a matter of having a good enough record that we get one of the top seeds. Because if you're the number one seed in your conference, you get a bye week. So you don't have to play the first playoff week. You get to stay at home and let everyone else fight. Um, so it's really important. And on top of that, whoever has the highest seeding gets home field advantage. So it's really important to try and get that. And like that is our only worry. It's less making the playoffs and making that. Whereas in the AFC West, there are like three, arguably four really good teams who are all going to beat the crap out of each other just to get a wild card spot.
Uh,
Um, and the other thing I wanted to talk about today is sort of some of I'm going to be using these terms pretty frequently, so I just wanted to explain them. So in
okay.
terms of like the brass of a team, like the management,
The
you
Woodwinds.
have yes. So you have the head coach. He is the primary coach of the team. And that role varies from team to team. Sometimes you'll have a head coach who's very defensive focused. So he'll mostly worry about getting the defense up. Or you'll have a coach who's all offensive, like Andy Reid, who basically every play he's going through his Rolodex of plays, figuring out the best strategy. Some coaches aren't really into calling plays and they're more overall strategy vibes guys. Like they rally the troops and make sure they play, get everyone in the best spirits and like handle egos. Or you'll get like guys who are really good at managing the moment to moment of the game, where they'll notice a weakness and be able to exploit it. You also have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. They are more specialized, focusing on individual, like those specific parts of the team. You and outside of the individual games, you have a general manager. He's basically like a producer, like to use movie terms. Like he decides this is how we're going to build this team, and he goes about like signing the players and figuring out who they're going to draft. And basically, he shapes the team in his image and is like, here are your players, coach. Figure out how to make this work.
That sounds like
Like
too many people.
yes, and it's very interesting. Every team has very different politics where it's like this person has more power or this person has more power. Like good teams have a harmony and bad teams have dictators, basically.
And
And
there's
there are a
also
couple
team owners, right?
yes, and the owner is at the top. The owners are sometimes they are football people. For example, the Pittsburgh Steelers are owned by the Rooney family, and the Rooney family has basically been in the business of football for a while now. So they like care about, so they're like
Yeah.
pretty versed in what needs to be done.
Wayne Rooney
Where
is one of the most famous footballers.
that's no relation, I'm afraid. Or you'll have an example like Dan Snyder, who is just a rich guy who wanted to own a football team and isn't smart about it and is kind of just annoying and doesn't know
Mhm.
how to like manage a team.
I
Like
was gonna make a feet joke, but I remember I did that last time.
um, the Bills are an interesting example because we are owned by the Pakulas. They're this wealthy couple. Apparently, they're from Penn State. I only know that because Joe references how much money they've given to the hockey team.
No.
And they owned the Buffalo Sabres. And when our original owner Ralph Wilson passed away and his family didn't want to inherit the team, they decided, you know what? Let's keep the team in Buffalo. We're going to buy it. And they are very hands-on with our hockey team, the Buffalo Sabres, and they're bad. Like they're really bad. Like their decisions have hurt the team. Whereas the Bills, they are super hands off and they're like, we're going to hire this really good general manager and this really good coach, and we're going to kind of let them just figure it out. And that's resulted in us being great because the owners are doing what owners should do and just be the guys who sign checks. There are a
Mm.
lot of politics about ownership that I'm not going to get into here because I want this to be more broad discussion. But as we go on throughout the season, I can talk about individual owner incidents that are a big problem. And yeah, those that covers all of like the broad stuff I wanted to talk about. So now, well, do you have any questions about all that?
Um, I just feel like if you have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator, that kind of covers all the bases.
Yes.
So, like having possibly multiple coaches on top of that seems silly.
I
Um,
don't disagree.
I would like to petition for a kicker coordinator as well as a bench coordinator.
Well, okay, there is no bench coordinator, but there usually is a special teams coordinator on top of those who handles kickers and punters and like the coverage. And
They
teams will
thought of
also have
everything.
like, yes, they will also have like lower level people. Like they'll have someone who's just the quarterback's coach. For example, the Buffalo Bills have this guy Ken Dorsey, whose job was to focus on the quarterbacks, and now he's our offensive coordinator because our previous offensive coordinator left to go be a head coach. I would describe it as like the head coach is kind of the president, and he has his cabinet that
Hmm,
handles like the individual specialty things, and they will bring their concerns up to the head coach, and the head coach will be the final decision maker for everything.
I see. I see.
Yes. Um, all right. Let us get into the AFC, the American Football Conference, which was formed after the NFC. Originally, the NFC was the NFL; those were the only teams. And then Lamar Hunt, I believe he was in oil, was like, "Hey, I want to have a team in Dallas." And the NFL was like, "No, we don't want a team in Dallas." And he was like, "Harumph! I'm going to make my own league." Um,
What's wrong with Dallas?
right? And the funniest thing is, within a few short years, he moved that team, the Dallas Texans, to Kansas City, and now they're the Chiefs.
Now the
Yes, the
Kansas City Texans.
yes, it
Yes.
was a weird name, but they committed. But yes, and yes, the Buffalo Bills were one of those original teams, which is also funny because our original owner Ralph Wilson wanted to have a team in Miami, and Lamar Hunt is like, "I'm going to be one of those people who kicks the ladder out from behind him. No, you can't have a team in Miami."
So
And he's like,
they just
"Right,
like they made their teams in their cities and they're just like no more. We only want them here. No other place can have them.
kind of, yes. Like literally, a man formed an entire league based around the idea that he should be allowed to pick where he wants his team, and then denied other people that right.
That's so strange. I feel like most, well, maybe not most sports things. Maybe I'm making this up, but I feel like most sports places would be like, if a new city or area wants to make a team, that should be like encouraged. It's like that Las Vegas team in that one sport, whatever it may be, that was recently created.
It is complicated. It's a combination of politics, the amount of talent that's in the league, because you don't want one team that is just completely bereft of talent because
The
there are just no
Raiders?
more good players. Um, well, the Raiders have been established for a long time. I can
Um,
get into that.
oh, it was a
Well, I
hockey
think you're
team, I
thinking of the
think.
Golden Knights. Yes. Well, that was an expansion. Usually, a league will expand when it feels like it has room to make more revenue. The NBA is getting ready to expand. They haven't officially said it, but it really sounds like they're going to add a team in Vegas and Seattle.
Yeah.
Like the politics of adding new teams to a league can be very messy, and also because like again, the league, all of these leagues are owned by a coalition of billionaires who have to decide whether or not they want to add someone to their cool secret club.
Yeah.
And also, again, it's like, can our league, like, will this add more money to our league or just dilute the product? And right now, the NFL is pretty balanced on that front.
Hmm.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's
All right.
start with the West, AFC West, because that's what we started with last week. All
Okay.
right, so let's start with the Kansas City Chiefs. They have kind of been the it girl of the NFL for a while now.
Hmm.
The last since they got Andy Reid from the Eagles, they have been consistently good. But the last like 5-ish years, they have been competing for a Super Bowl every year. They have either been in the conference finals or they've been in the Super Bowl. It feels like they kind of left them on the table because their last 4 years were they lost in the conference finals game, they won a Super Bowl, they lost a Super Bowl, and they lost in a conference finals game. And people would argue they probably should have gotten at least one more Super Bowl out of that. And all of that is because of Patrick Mahomes, who I believe you know because he's now in Fortnite.
He's on my team.
Indeed. Um, Patrick Mahomes was, how do I describe him? he I hate like he's the bane of my existence because he keeps tormenting my team. But basically, he's a magician at quarterback. He's kind of changed how people approach quarterbacks. Like
I thought
he
there
was
was
good
only
in
one way to throw a ball, but now I know.
you'd be shocked. But basically, like got drafted kind of late in the first round because people were like, I don't know. He's kind of weird and sloppy, and he kind of like runs around a lot. Basically, at any given time, he can do something weird with his arm that scores a touchdown. Like he can be literally sideways and just kind of twerk his shoulders and send the ball 50 yards, right?
Oh,
Um,
I'm so confused.
like, like there used to be a way quarterbacks threw the ball where it's like, all right, you stand firm and still, you take 2 steps forward, turn your hips, and really, you know,
Yeah.
it's all in the
You put your
legs and the hips.
fingers in between the laces perfectly,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
you throw it and it spins.
Yes, exactly. Like there was this very rudimentary way to view it. Whereas he can kind of just do whatever and seemingly throw the ball 70 yards across his body, across like from the other side of the field.
Yeah.
I would describe him basically as Brett Favre, but in Super Saiyan God mode,
Bo
where
Foofer?
it's like, yes,
Hey,
um, where basically it's like, oh, he believes he can make any throw on the field, but he actually kind of can. They are kind of in influx. They just got rid of Tyreek Hill, who was this incredibly gifted, basically the fastest guy in football. And it feels like they're fundamentally changing their offense to be more slow and methodic, where they're not trying to score every play, they're just trying to control the ball for every play. Um, People can't decide if they're in or out on the Chiefs, especially after it looked they were up on the Bengals last year by 20 points in that final playoff game to decide who went to the Super Bowl, and they blew that lead in one of the most inexplicable collapses we've ever seen. But I am high on them this year. I think they will be good just in the way we're not used to seeing them. All right. The Los Angeles Chargers. The West is probably going to be the one I talk about the most because it's the most interesting division. These are the guys who made the anime opening for you.
woo! Big
Yes.
Chargers fan.
They are the embodiment of trying to make fetch happen and it just never happening.
Oh,
Because they're like they have a cool name, they have a cool logo, they have a cool they have cool uniforms, they have a cool vibe, but they've been to the playoffs once in the last 10 years.
but they have a great social media team.
Yes, they have a great social media team, and they do have talent. On defense, they have Vincent Jackson, who's a really good defensive back. They have Khalil Mack, who's been one of the best pass rushers in football. They have a bunch of good wide receivers. They have Austin Eckler, who in fantasy football is quietly that guy where you're like, wait, he scored how many points? And at quarterback, they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, this guy, Justin Herbert, um, who is one of my favorite guys just because I love any guy who makes the NFL media look dumb. When he was getting drafted, everyone's like, Justin Herbert, he's quiet, he's not a good leader, like, he's whatever, like, why isn't he better? And then in his first year, he has more touchdowns than any rookie's ever had. His story is interesting because he got drafted like seventh. And the idea was he was going to sit for a while behind another quarterback, Tyrod Taylor. And then in the second game of the season, this newscast came out minutes before opening kickoff. Hey, yeah, so Tyrod Taylor's being rushed to the hospital. We don't know what happened. And what it turns out is the team doctor was trying to give him a pain injection, fucked up, and accidentally pierced his lung. And he needed to be
Oh,
rushed to the hospital. So they're like, hey, Justin, remember how we were like, you're not going to start for a bit? So you're playing now against the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs for your first game. And Justin Herbert took that with poise and decorum and never looked back. Whereas Patrick Mahomes is this like wild card doing everything and anything all the time. Justin Herbert is more of like he's like the best example of a classic quarterback where he's like follows protocol perfectly. He has a system. He's like this is what this play is going to look like, and I'm going to execute it to the perfect, perfectly.
Reminds
Um,
me of the movie Cars. Like you have the old car who does things the old way, and you have this new rookie that's coming up doing crazy things like driving backwards and
Kind of
you know
weirdly, I was going to describe it as Osmosis Jones.
I mean that also makes sense, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a familiar trope, come to think of it. This is one of the two old lore stories I'm going to do for this episode. So, the Chargers should have made the playoffs last year. And they ended up in one of the greatest not ties to ever happen in NFL history. So, for the final game of the season, and it was the night game that week, it was the Sunday night football game, literally the last game of the year before the playoffs. It was Chargers versus the Las Vegas Raiders, and whoever won that game would get the 7th playoff spot. But if they tied due to a whole bunch of convoluted bullshit, they would both get to go to the playoffs. Like they would jump ahead because a tie is kind of a win. Like it's like a half win basically. They would jump in front of the Steelers and both of them would get to go to the playoffs. And everyone's like, haha, that'll never happen. And then it goes to overtime. And the idea with overtime is both uh, whoever scores a touchdown first will win. But if no one scores, like it will, like both, if you kick a field goal, the other team can tie it with a field goal, and then you keep going. And if no one ends up getting the lead within 15 minutes, they just call it a tie. And we are down to the final minute, and the score is still tied, and everyone is freaking out, like, "Oh my god, this is going to happen! This is going to happen!" And it looks like the Raiders are going to throw in the towel. Like they are just running the ball into the middle of the field. Like they are basically trying to run down the clock. And it's very clear. And you can see the Raiders coach like looking across, kind of trying to signal, like, hey man, we're gonna surrender. And like, and they could justify it because it's like, why risk throwing an interception or fumbling the ball when we can just run out the clock and go to the playoffs? And the Chargers coach, in the ultimate jabroni move, calls a timeout and stops the clock. And the Raiders coach kind of has a look like, dude, what are you doing? Now we have to actually try. So they get enough yards to kick a field goal and end up winning the game. So the Raiders get to go to the playoffs and the Chargers go home. As I described it to you earlier, it is literally that Game Grumps bit where Aaron runs off a platform trying to get a one up, and Dan screams, "What the fuck are you doing?" And that's just the
It-
embodiment of the Chargers being this snake bitten franchise where everyone wants them to be good, but something will always go wrong to keep them from being good.
I
And
will
this is
say, I have never enjoyed the aspect of sports of running down the clock. I think it's lame and not enjoyable to watch or to participate in.
I don't wholly disagree because sometimes, like people, like if you try to run up the score, they'll accuse you of bush league. But it's like they'll be like, "That's unprofessional." It's like, well, you could stop them. If you were better, you would just stop them. Um,
Yeah, but it reminds me of like soccer when people would like um, either faking an injury, which is like the classic thing people think of for soccer, which also bothers me because it's like you're playing into the stereotype. But then also like if you're given a free kick and then the other team will pick up the ball and like argue with the ref so that the team kicking can't actually kick the ball. So they're like preventing you from playing the game. Things like that just
yeah,
always trigger me. And like, so I feel the same about like timeouts in football and basketball, where it's like just play, just do it.
I mean, I will say the NFL tends to be better with time management than other leagues. I love basketball, but fuck the last 2 minutes of any basketball game. Uh, Like, I literally think you could save basketball if you're like, all right, after a certain point, if you foul someone, they just get foul shots and they get to keep the ball. You can't use that as a strategy to like get the ball back with extra time. But I digress. Like,
Anyway,
everyone is high on the Chargers this year. A lot of people are like, they're going to be the team representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. And I just refuse because I'm like, when it comes to Saint franchises, I will believe it when I see it. I will buy into them when they are literally holding up the Super Bowl trophy and not a minute before.
I'll buy into it right now because anime.
Fair enough. The Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are the team that got Russell Wilson from a haystack or whatever the rap is.
Yep,
So
yep.
they traded a whole bunch of picks to get him. I am very sus of this team because, like, they have been the team for the last couple of years where everyone's like, "Oh, they have so much talent. If they just had a good quarterback." And I'm suspicious of that because I'm like, if you were that good, you would still make the playoffs without a quarterback. Like, the Bears got Mitchell Trubisky, the MVP of the Nickelodeon games, to the playoffs.
Huh.
Like terrible quarterbacks have been dragged to the playoffs. Blake Bortles, who is so bad at playing quarterback, it was a meme in the show Good Place. Um, have you seen Good Place?
No, I do know of the show. I have not watched it.
Short version, there's a character who's established as being an idiot, and they were like, what is a funny team for him to be obsessed with? And they chose the Jacksonville Jaguars, who at the time had Blake Bortles, who his own team was like, yeah, he sucks, but in the playoffs, something he lights a fire under himself. Um, but anyway, yes. So
That's very funny to me as a little cutaway, being like the worst of the best. Like, the NFL is the best football players in the country, and then to be the worst quarterback in the collection of the best is just
right,
very comical to me.
I do like that is my thing. It is something that charms me where it's like at the end of the day, you're still one of 32 people deemed quote unquote good enough to lead an NFL team into battle.
Yeah.
So that's not nothing. Something. You can put it on a resume. Um, and like they do have talent. Like Patrick Surtain is already one of the best cornerbacks in the league after 1 year. Javante Williams is the guy that everyone's horny for because he has a cool name and he's one of those running backs who like punches 17 people on every single play. Like he just humiliates people. And they have good wide receivers. But like again, if you were really that good, you would have done it without Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson's kind of lost his luster. Like his last year was pretty bad. And as he's getting older, you're like, is he going to be as good as he has been the last couple years? Because he's a guy who, as a player, he's very small. He's like 6 foot. He kind of can't see over his lines. So he needs to be a guy who's running around and doing crazy stuff every play. And if he can't
Mm.
do that because his knees are worn down, then what is he? He's also a guy who I've kind of gotten tired of. He's very self important. He seems to think he's like this Peyton Manning esque, like, I'm a genius who's going to read out the plays. And I'm like, sir, you do not understand who you are. They're another team where I'm like, I will believe it when I see it. But at the same time, I understand basically the meta of the NFL is if you don't have a top five quarterback, then you're just not going to win. Like, you just
Ah,
don't have a chance. Like, as quarterback play gets better and better, if you don't have that, it just doesn't matter. Like, the era where the Eagles could win a Super Bowl, Nick Foles, is probably over. So
like
that
2 years
forces
ago.
right. It wasn't that long ago, which is what's scary. But that's how good
Oh wait, no,
quarterbacks are.
they had the other guy, right? Or no, it was Nick Foles.
Yes. Well, they had Carson Wentz, who we thought was that guy, but then it
Right,
turns
right,
out he
right.
had the mental maturity of a sad alt right Twitter kid.
Yeah, they were
Um,
looking for the dog and they couldn't find him.
yeah, and it turns out it was actually a goldfish. So I didn't want to say cat because cats are cool.
Cats
Um,
are cool.
But yes, so and like maybe Russell Wilson won't work out, but I understand why you mortgage your future to get Russell. Because it's better than just being in nowhere's land. The Las Vegas Raiders, they were fucking cursed last year. So they had John Gruden, who's one of Kieran's like, oh, this guy's grinder, uh, as
He
their
has
head
edge.
coach. Yes, John Gruden is the embodiment of like, yeah, this is why you shouldn't just be all about football because then your life is very dull. Uh, one
Hmm.
time he got interviewed and someone was like, "Man, you watch so much when he was working for Monday Night Football. Someone was like, "Man, you watch so much footage. Do you ever see your wife and children?" And he literally didn't have an answer. He couldn't answer that. And I'm just like, that is a man who is hollow,
That's
who
a bit
is
of a yike.
empty inside. Yes, a big yike. And then during the season, it came like basically uh the NFL was being investigated for discriminatory practices and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was mainly focused on the Washington football team, but then a whole bunch of emails from John Gruden got leaked where he's just slinging around homophobic slurs
Oh
and
no.
racist obscenities. So they had to fire him. Even though they owed him a lot of money, they're like, this can't go on. And then, literally 2 weeks later, one of their star receivers, Henry Ruggs, uh, got in a drunk driving incident where he killed like two
Ah.
people in parallel. You probably heard this. It
Oh
was
yeah.
mortifying. Like, and
He's
this
going
team
like
was
a
crazy.
hundred some miles an hour or
Yeah.
something like.
So this team had like three or four calamities, and yet they somehow made the playoffs. And the fact that they lost in the first round almost didn't matter because they somehow survived all of these bad vibes.
Yeah.
They they are kind of a sleeper team because I'm like, if you can survive all of that, imagine what you do with a stable year where you have an actual NFL coach and you don't have to deal with the tragedy that one of your teammates was complicit in a horrific murder. Um, they also they brought in Devonte Adams, who is this incredible wide receiver, one of those guys who can do it all. And he's reuniting with his college quarterback, Derek Carr, who's the starting quarterback for the Raiders.
Hmm.
If they make, they're one of the teams where I'm like, honestly, if they end up making the playoffs and actually all like competing for a Super Bowl, I wouldn't be shocked. But I could also see them just missing the playoffs by a game. They have
Mhm.
one of the biggest like ceiling to floor ratios of any team.
Interesting.
Um, yes. All right. The NFC South, the fucking worst division in all of the NFL.
Oh
A
no.
quad of uninteresting, miserable teams who everyone hates, and we all want them to just go the fuck away. Um, the Tennessee Titans have won this division the last couple years. They are the embodiment of this division where everyone's like, why the fuck? No, stop. You shouldn't be winning football games. Um, their entire offense is built around Derrick Henry. And maybe I just hate them because Derrick Henry, as I described last night, has cucked the Buffalo Bills multiple years. He is this freak of nature. He's huge, he runs fast, and he just runs through people and gets one or two highlights every game. Every game, he'll have a play where he runs into defense, like basically does a move I describe as the "fuck you and anyone who's ever looked at you kindly" move, where he'll just throw a defensive player into the shadow realm.
Oh.
And last year, he broke his foot and the gears kind of came off. And yet, in
Oh.
spite of that, they still were the first seed in the AFC because the Bills kind of choked and the Chiefs weren't as good as they should have been. And then they lost in the first round like a bunch of jabronis. They have a quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, who he like basically is the emperor not having clothes, where everyone's like, oh, he is a quarterback. But then when it gets to the playoffs, he just implodes. Um, they had to
And he's
trade
naked.
away. What was that?
And he's naked.
Yes, and his penis is out. Um, they had to trade away their best wide receiver because they're literally like, oh shoot, maybe we shouldn't have given our quarterback and running back so much money. The vibes on them are just so weird and off. And then they drafted another quarterback, and Ryan Tannehill was like, well, I'm not going to help him. Like, it's not my job to monitor this kid. And yet they'll probably still make the playoffs, and everyone will be mad when they waste a precious playoff spot to lose like 12-6.
So they're
Um,
like surprisingly good, but nobody wants them to be good because
right.
they will never get anywhere.
Hmm.
Okay.
Exactly. They are like the Big Mac of teams, where it's like they're good in the most boring, uninteresting way, and everyone agrees it's bad. Um,
Mm.
the Indianapolis Colts, formerly the Baltimore Colts, which is something I can explain at a later date. Um, because it's actually kind of an interesting story. But the Colts, it looked so. Where to even begin with the Colts? The Colts are a team in denial. They've basically been a team in denial for 6-ish years. So Peyton Manning, who was their former quarterback, he had a degenerative shoulder problem and had to miss an entire year. Basically, his shoulder stopped working,
Oh,
um, which is funny. It's interesting because there's a third Manning brother named Cooper who literally had to stop playing football because of that problem. And they checked Eli and Peyton for it, and they're like, "Well, Peyton, let's just wait and see." And then the bill finally came due when he was like 35.
that's
Um,
crazy that there were three of them. That's like the Jonas Brothers
oh yeah,
with
and
the
their
fourth
dad
brother.
Archie Manning was in the NFL too, and
Jeez.
wasn't nearly as good as his children, but like he was beloved and popular, and he was just on a bad team. But anyway, so Peyton Manning got hurt. They had the worst record in the league, and they get Andrew Luck, who was like basically a prodigy. It was like, oh, he has it all. He has every tool you could want from a quarterback. He's a great leader. He's a tough guy. He fights. He's basically the guy you would want to follow Peyton Manning. And they had their ups and downs. They took forever to build a team around him. And then when they finally had all the pieces in place to make a Super Bowl run with Andrew Luck retires before the age of 30 because he had been beat up and he'd taken so many hits and he was just so tired that he just didn't want to do it anymore. Like he was
Oh,
just like, "Yeah, I'm tired of getting injuries. I'm tired of getting hit. Like I wake up every other day and there's some kind of pain that bothers me, and I can't do this anymore. Like I want to have a life after football. I don't want football to be my grave." And that sent shockwaves through the NFL. And a lot
I
of
think
teams really should learn from that, but they aren't.
yeah, that's pretty reasonable. I feel like.
Right. Because he's a really smart guy. Like he lived in Europe most of his life. He's like an architecture student. Like and I really respected him for being like, "No, I sacrificed everything for this team and it's not worth it to keep grinding." But basically the Colts have been in denial about this. They're like, "What? We're still good." It's the Simpsons thing of the pig landing in the water and it's like, "It's still good. It's just a little it's just a little mossy. It's still good. It's just airborne." Where they keep trying to bring in quarterbacks to they're like they're another team where they're like, "Oh, we're just a quarterback away if we can find the right quarterback," and they just keep going through quarterbacks, which the apex was last year where they had Carson Wentz, and all they had to do was win one of their last 2 games to go to the playoffs, and Carson Wentz defecated all over the field, 2 humiliating games. The
Yeah.
capstone and the embodiment of their post luck uh, sort of fortunes was they had to beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had already secured the number 1 overall pick in the worst uh, record in the league. They lost to them. They lost to the worst team in the league, 27-8.
But they had the first pick,
The Jacksonville Jaguars did. They'd already secured it. They had already guaranteed they were going to have the worst record in the league.
so wait, does the worst team get the first pick?
Yes,
That
because the idea
seems.
is then you get better players.
Yeah, I get. Well, yeah, I guess that makes it even. Okay.
Yeah, it's a way of trying to balance the talent. Like a
Right.
team that is so loathsome, literally, the Jacksonville Jaguar fans were wearing clown makeup to embody the spirit of their team, and the Colts still lost to them.
I feel like that kind of sucks if you're a rookie joining the NFL, where it's like if you're really good coming out of like college or something,
Oh,
and then it's
yes,
like, yeah, you're gonna go to the worst team, by the way.
yes. I will discuss this. There is one more long lore story I want to give you before we wrap up, and
Hmm.
I will
Hmm.
describe that sort of
All right.
sensation. Yes, and it basically created a downward spiral for the Colts. Apparently, the owner Jim Irsay stormed into the office of the head coach and said, "Carson Wentz will not be on this football team next year." So
Oof.
they basically traded him for scraps and traded for Matt Ryan, the Falcons quarterback, who was good but has never been able to get over the hump. He famously pooped his pants in the Super Bowl against the Patriots and gave up the biggest lead in NFL history,
Was
or the
that
biggest lead in a
Deflategate?
Super Bowl. What was that?
Was that Deflategate?
No, no, that was a couple years after.
Oh.
It might have been the same year as Deflategate. Now that I think about it, but yeah,
Mhm.
the his Falcons had a 28-point lead on the Patriots, and they somehow lost the game.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's just a scenario where it's like, look, you had a chance to win a Super Bowl with Andrew Luck, but Andrew Luck's gone. You have to accept that this team that you've built isn't going to win a Super Bowl. You need to burn it down and start from scratch. But they just
That's
don't
one of
want
your
to.
favorite strategies.
If I was going to impart one thing from you from the entire experience is the difference between a good organization and a bad organization is knowing how much time you have to win a Super Bowl and when you don't have a chance to win a Super Bowl and reacting to that appropriately. And a lot
Hmm.
of teams just don't know how to react correctly. And it results in the Colts just keep bringing in random quarterbacks, hoping this will be the one that figures it out for them. When it's like you just have to accept you need to lose and get a good quarterback in the draft and start
Yeah.
over. Also, like I also think if there was going to be a year where they spiral, it's going to be this year because their star player Jonathan Taylor, they probably gave him the ball too much last year, and he might have a down year just from wear and tear. And also, their owner Jim Irsay will not shut up about losing to the Jaguars in a way that I feel like really messes with the vibes. I'm surprised no one's taken him aside and just been like, "Dude, you gotta stop. Like, you're really bumming everyone out."
Just really doesn't
Um,
like Jaguars.
yeah, weird cats. I don't get them.
Yeah.
Next up, the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans, they are the newest team in the NFL. They were founded in 2003.
Wait, so
They
they
have,
had a Texans team that they moved to be the
yes,
Chiefs, and then they only
yes.
just remade a Texans team.
It's somehow even more complicated than that
Oh
because
no.
there was a team called the Houston Oilers. They got moved to Tennessee and became the Tennessee Titans. And when the league decided to add an extra team, they're like, let's put a team in Houston again as like as a sorry kind of like a
There's
pity.
a lot of Texas teams.
Yeah, probably too many. Currently, there are there's only two right now, but there were three at one point.
Hmm.
Um, there's also three my Florida teams, which is silly.
Oh
But
yeah.
yes, the Texans have kind of always been a listless franchise. They've made the playoffs once or twice. They were the original team for Deshaun Watson, who I mentioned last week was the quarterback who was accused by several masseuses of improper conduct.
Yep.
And they finally traded him, and everyone's like, "Oh, this is the year they're going to have be the worst team in the league." And inexplicably, they were kind of a scrappy and energetic team. I think getting the Deshaun Watson fog away from them at least gave them a sense of like purpose, where they're like, "Come on, let's prove the haters wrong. Let's like rally and do something here." Um, Basically, the team right now is a whole bunch of. It's basically a mercenary team. They signed a whole bunch of sort of journeyman players, guys who have been in the league for a long time but have never really established themselves as great. And it seems like they're just figuring out like which ones they're going to keep and which ones they're going to let leave as they try to build an actual NFL team. Because the Houston Texans traditionally haven't felt like an NFL team. Like they just haven't had the talent.
Hmm.
Whereas now at least it feels like there's a plan in place, at least for them, where it's like, all right, let's try and build something here. Like, let's at least try to get a couple good play. Like, let's try to lock in our core players this year, and then maybe we'll get an early enough draft pick to draft a new quarterback, um, and then we'll start. We'll try to make a team out of this. I will say though, their current quarterback is named Davis Mills. He's fine. He's not going to be the guy, but I like the name Davis Mills because he sounds like if General Mills had a mascot. Hello, my name is Davis Mills, and here is cereal.
Here is cereal.
Here is the cereals. The Jacksonville Jaguars. So they are another listless franchise. They were formed in the 1995, and they've had a few high moments, but for the most part, they're just another kind of listless. Like, did we really need this team? Sort of vibe. Um, they've had the worst. They've had the worst record in the league for the past 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, so the year before this one, they had the worst overall record, and they got the number one overall pick, and it was perfect because Trevor Lawrence was in the draft. So Trevor Lawrence is this prodigy, another quarterback prodigy. Basically, people have been horny for him since high school, which, call the police.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
like,
yeah, basically, he's like another one of those guys who can do it all. Where it's like he's fast, he can throw the ball 100 mile. He's a great leader. He can kind of read the play. They draft him, and it's like, all right, everything's coming together. And then they make the mistake of making Urban Meyer their head coach, another guy that Kieran likes for some reason. And it was
that tells me all I
it
need
is
to know.
yes, basically yes. And it was a fucking nightmare. Apparently, he was never prepared. He apparently didn't know like any of the players on the teams he was going up against. Famously, like week 5, he just was like, hey, they played Cincinnati, and he's like, I'm gonna stay here. And he went to a bar he co-owned and was like grinding up on a young woman who wasn't his wife.
Uh,
Um, he apparently verbally abused his staff. At one point, he kicked his kicker. Like his kicker missed a kick during practice, and he like swiped at him and was like, "Make your damn kicks!" And he ended up getting fired. Basically, no one knows what to think of Trevor Lawrence anymore or this team because it's like Urban Meyer was so bad it obfuscates if anyone was good or if they were just being brought down by him.
hmm.
Like, is Trevor Lawrence secretly a bust and we all just like got too hyped on him? Or was this entire malaise just too bad for anyone to comprehend anything that was happening?
I'm sure it didn't help.
Absolutely not. And that's why people are weirdly high on the Jaguars now, because like, okay, they brought in Doug Peterson, who was the coach for the Eagles that won the Super Bowl. It's like, okay,
That did sound familiar.
yes, adults are in the room now, and they overpaid for a lot of mid-tier players. But at the same time, when you're a franchise that literally has your fans wearing clown makeup, begging for their GM to be fired, like you have to kind of overpay to create the illusion of being a professional organization. Like they have players now. And people have argued if you actually watch the footage, Trevor Lawrence was trying to do everything all at once, and he kind of looked all right considering his
Everything
stats
everywhere
weren't
all at
very good.
once?
Yes, but I don't think he has to worry about taxes.
Oh,
Um, because they need him to hit. They need him to be the best player. But this is the example, and I'll get to this.
mhm.
So, in terms of how much it sucks, because so many franchises in this league are completely listless and mediocre and mid, and they just have people. Their GM is Trent Baalke, who is basically the embodiment of Jafar, like sort of this shadowy figure behind the scenes who like whispers into the owner's ear to get what he wants. And he has just never been able to form a good team. And it sucks that Trevor Lawrence, this incredible prospect, is just stuck with that. And are you familiar with the name Jamarcus Russell?
No.
Okay. So this is why being number one overall pick sucks. Jamarcus Russell was drafted number one by the Ravens in 2008. He was this physical freak of a quarterback. He was like 6'5". He was built. He could throw the ball like 80 yards, but he imploded immediately. He didn't put the work in. Famously, his coaches gave him blank tapes to see if he was actually watching the footage they were giving him, and he was like, "Yeah, I looked at the blitz packages and whatnot." So they're like, "Oh, cool. So he's not studying." He struggled to stay under 300 pounds, like he was failing conditioning tests. Also, they found out he showed up at the draft high as hell. Um, he was a disaster, like a full blown capital D disaster. And famously, he didn't join the team until November because he held out for more money. He's like, I want the biggest contract any rookie's ever gotten. And he got it. And because he was so bad, the NFL's like, we can't let this happen again. We can't give these 20 somethings more money than like veterans get, like guys who have been in the league for 10 years. So they set a cap. So basically, now the first overall pick only can get a certain amount of money, and then the second overall pick can only get a certain amount of money. So now, not only do you get stuck on a garbage franchise more often than not, you don't even get money. Like, you get a lot of money, make no mistake, but you don't get like the, well, I'll never have to worry about it things ever again kind of money.
Yeah, that's
And
lame.
that's why, yeah, right.
That guy
It
sucks.
freaking sucks. Yeah, fuck Jamarcus Russell. Well, I will say there has been sort of a rehabilitation of his image because, like, he's talked about, like, yeah, my sort of father figure, who was my uncle, died just before the draft, and I really was having trouble coping with that. And also, people got a little too mean about his weight. Like, there's a clip
Nah.
where Stephen A. Smith literally is just calling him Jabba the Hutt over and over and over and over again. And Skip Bayless just quietly goes, I didn't draft himself. Um, which is the one time Skip Bayless has been a likable, charming human being. Um, but yes, and they had the number one overall pick again, and they drafted Travon Walker, who, again, I'm like, this guy could be good, but he's gotten put on a franchise that historically is not good at getting the best out of people, and that makes me feel sorry for him. All right, the AFC North. Let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. They represented the AFC in the Super Bowl last year. They They are kind of the most exciting team in the NFL because all of their best players are really young. They are led by Joe Burrow, Joe Cool. Uh, he was drafted number one overall, and he's not the strongest quarterback. He doesn't have the best arm. He's not necessarily the most accurate, but he is maybe the best leader in the NFL, where he gets people to buy into his shit. He
Did they
has a
ever call him
swagger.
Sleepy Joe?
No, the exact opposite. And I love someone made the comment, it's like, God, you'd swear some of these people have never seen a cool white person before. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
he's just a tough guy who just absorbs hit after hit, always gets up. There's a great story where he when the summer protests in 2020 broke out, like he tearfully talked to his team about a time where he like experienced racial discrimination with a teammate at LSU, and they were like, okay, this guy's the real deal. He's the
wait, I
kind of
thought you
guy
said
that
he was white.
well, he is white, but he was describing a teammate experiencing racial
Oh,
discrimination.
okay.
And like apparently the whole team bought in and they're like, okay, this guy's the real deal. He's like he's for real. Um and yeah, he's just got a swagger and energy that gets the entire team fired up. And then what really helped them break out was they drafted this guy Jamar Chase, who is also another guy where you're like, as a wide receiver, he's not the biggest or the fastest or the best jumper, but he just has this inherent ability to do incredible things where he'll just catch a ball like he'll catch a ball for 10 yards and then go, whoop, I slipped by you, whoop, you slipped by you. Oh, I scored a touchdown. What do you know? They have T. Higgins, who's like 6'5", physical freak. I really want
Higgins.
Bills to get him. Yes, also a great name. Yeah, they are a team who I think are like they feel like a team that got to the Super Bowl a year earlier than expected, and now people are down on them. But I'm like, they're still young, they still got energy, they still got swagger. I fully expect them to go all in this year and just sling it around the yard. Um, the Baltimore Ravens, they are who were originally the Cleveland Browns. I won't get into it right now. They are my sleep. They are casually my team to win the Super Bowl this year. So as you probably know, they have Lamar Jackson, who is this superhuman. He is one of only two quarterbacks in NFL history to run for 1,000 yards. He's super fast, athletic, freak of nature, um, and basically what screwed them up last year is literally like half their team got hurt. Three of their defensive backs, a bunch of their linemen, three different running backs had season-ending injuries. Basically, the team that was supposed to be the Baltimore Ravens didn't end up being the Baltimore Ravens. But now they're back, they're healthy. Lamar hopefully won't get COVID for a third time. And their most interesting story going into this offseason was Lamar Jackson, he doesn't have an agent, he represents himself. And he was negotiating for a contract. And instead of like signing a contract, he's like, you know what? I'm just going to play it out and prove myself. Like, I'll play my last year of this contract instead of locking down my big guaranteed money. I'm going to see if I can prove it. And the last time the Ravens did that was when they won the Super Bowl. They were giving up on their quarterback, Joe Flacco. They're like, we don't really feel this guy. And then he ends up winning a Super Bowl. And they're like, well, fuck, now we have to give him a huge contract. Like, I think Lamar could go scorched earth this year just to prove a point and then get the biggest contract in NFL history. And that amount of chaos and nonsense is what I live for with sports.
I actually remember when the Ravens won. For no particular reason, I just remember At one point, the Ravens won a Super Bowl, and I was alive for it.
They've won 2 Super Bowls in a row, as a matter of fact,
What?
but they beat Colin Kaepernick in the last one,
Ah,
which is a fun little fact. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they're another sleeper team for me because they've basically been at the mercy of Big Ben Roethlisberger for like the last 3 years. But Big Ben Roethlisberger hasn't been a good quarterback for like half a decade. He was old. He was lumbering. Basically, every play for their offense was he gets the ball snapped to him and immediately, basically, like hot potatoes it because he doesn't want to get hit, which is just not a healthy environment for an offense. Because it's like, oh, you can't do anything. You can't run the ball. You can't throw the ball deep. You basically just have to hope your wide receivers can catch the ball and do something and not immediately get hit and break their necks. They have a
hmm.
surprising amount of off. Like, they got Mitch Trubisky, who's the embodiment of mid in the NFL. But that alone is such an elevation from where they are. It's like, oh, maybe they'll be good. Like, they have great offensive players. Najee Harris is a great running back. Chase Claypool is a physical freak. George Pickens is a physical freak. And they have a good defense. Like, this is a good case study of going from bad to mid at quarterback. How much of a jump is that really? Um, the Cleveland Browns, I talked about them a lot in our initial video. Their whole thing was they had a quarterback, Baker Mayfield, who is good but not great. He was hurt most of last year. And then when Deshaun Watson basically got cleared of criminal charges, they threw their hat into the ring. And Baker got so mad about that, he said, well, I'm not going to play for you anymore. So figure that out. And in a panic, the Cleveland Browns sold their souls and gave Deshaun Watson the biggest contract in NFL history. And it is really embarrassing and gross. And I kind of hate talking about the Browns because of it, but it is what it is, and we kind of have to live with it. And it's sad because there's a lot of guys on the Browns I actually do like. Nick Chubb is this really cool running back who can squat almost 1,000 pounds. He has thighs the size of several human beings. If anyone was going to run for 2,000 yards again, it'll be him. And Miles Garrett is one of my favorite players. He is a defensive lineman who you probably, if you know him for anything, it's that time he hit someone with their own helmet in the middle of a game.
I think I do remember that.
Yes, and I am very much on his side because it's like, look, if a dude's charging at you, you're probably not thinking about the fact that you have a helmet in your.
Yeah.
But I digress. All
I
right,
will
last
also say, right before that, I like the saying that Kevin uses about dropping the Browns off at the Super Bowl as code for
yes,
pooping.
which is the embodiment of that franchise. They are another. Basically, the snake bitten franchises in the NFL are the Bills, the Chargers, the Browns, the Lions, and the Vikings. Franchises that seem to be cursed in some way, shape, or form.
Nice.
All right, the AFC East, our final division. I'll do the Bills last. So the New England Patriots, former, basically the evil empire, shit is weird right now. So they don't have an offensive or defensive coordinator. Basically, their coaching staff is Bill Belichick, one of the most successful coaches in NFL history. And he brought back Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, his former defensive and special teams coaches who flamed out when they tried to become head coaches. And they're kind of just running everything. It feels like like it literally feels like a place that's short staffed, so people are having to do 5 different jobs.
Hmm.
And everyone who's been at their camp is like, yeah, I don't know what they're doing. It just doesn't feel like they have a plan or an offense or a defense. Like they're kind of just doing whatever. Like they got into the playoffs last year because Mac Jones turned out to be really good as a rookie quarterback. But now it just feels like, okay, have we already reached our ceiling with this team? Like they got to the playoffs and they lost to the Bills in one of the most historic drubbings in playoff history. The Bills literally scored on every single possession they had the ball. They scored a touchdown on every single drive. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually like it's the happiest I've ever been as a Bills fan. And yeah, it feels like it, and historically like top tier coaches have had a rough end to their careers, but this in particular feels like, man, it really is like the Tom Brady versus Bill Belichick debate really is going to come out in favor of Tom Brady, isn't it? And again, it's tough because you want to give the benefit of the doubt to Bill because it's like he has so much history and so much established clout that you're like, well, he'll figure it out. He'll probably figure it out because that's what he does. But if it doesn't work out this year, it really is going to be like when you have to take the car keys away from your grandpa. Like, sorry, grandpa, you nicked that car yesterday. You can't drive any. We got to take the car away. Like, we'll drive you when you need to be driven. The New York Jets, another casually snake bin franchise where they are the embodiment of New York sports, New York City sports, like the Knicks or the Mets or even the Yankees in recent years, where it's like, if you didn't have the name New York attached to you, everyone would be so much harder on you and your lack of success. Um, so, all you need to know about this team is basically the coach and general manager have more of their feet on Zach Wilson, a quarterback from BYU who they drafted the year before this one. Um, who apparently really likes to have sex with older women. His girlfriend broke up with him and posted about how Zach Wilson hooked up with his mom's friend. And that's the only really interesting thing about him.
Huh.
And then but then during this preseason, he tore his knee, and everyone was going to be out for the season. But fortunately, he's only going to be out for a game or two. And it is literally history repeating itself. Because, and again, this is an example of bad teams staying bad. The Jets drafted third or fifth overall, like 3 years ago. They drafted a quarterback, Sam Darnold. He flamed out, and they're like, okay, we're not going to make this mistake again. Let's draft another young, scrappy kid who's a little rough around the edges, but this time we'll actually make it work.
Wow.
Um, yeah, the Miami Dolphins. Oh God. See, this is why like I need to learn to speed up because I could talk forever about the Miami Dolphins, but the Miami Dolphins, and I described this last time. Basically, they tried to beg Tom Brady to join their team. When Tom Brady retired, they were like courting him, and they're like, "You can be a part owner, and you can be our quarterback, and then when you retire, you'll be a full owner." And the NFL was like, "Absolutely fucking not! That's insane." And they took away a draft pick from them as punishment. Um, their current quarterback is this guy, Tua Tagovailoa, who for the longest time was the darling of the college football scene. And then he dislocated his hip, uh, which is a catastrophic injury. For a while, people were worried he'd never play football again. Like, I remember when like the draft sort of season started, he was getting a physical, and people were waiting on bated breath because like if he doesn't get cleared for this, he'll never play football again. And basically, there's an entire movement called Tuanon now because he hasn't been very good in the NFL. And he has a very hardcore group of supporters who, well, us naysayers call them Tuanon. They don't call themselves that. Where
I
they're
was
like,
gonna
no,
say.
he's actually good. You have to look at the footage. He can make this work. He can be an NFL superstar. And I just don't see it. He looks like a guy who almost broke his hip and is very afraid of having his hip broken.
Can he bring JFK Jr. back from the dead?
Uh, I don't know. I don't know how invested he is in the dark art. Um, but they are the team that brought in Tyreek Hill. They have another guy, Jalen Waddle, who is the most ironically named receiver in the NFL. He's actually really fast and athletic, but his last name is Waddle. They have a
Yeah.
lot of they have a lot of good talent, but all of it again, this is why you need a top 5 quarterback because it's like, yeah, if Tua cannot throw the ball past 30 yards accurately, and if he can't run around, and if he's afraid to get hit, just none of it matters. And last but not least, the Buffalo Bills.
Who?
They are they seem to be the consensus favorite to win the Super Bowl this year. Last
Is
year was
that
kind of
true, or are you
no,
saying
it
that?
is. A lot of people think they'll win the Super Bowl this year.
Everybody's been saying it. You just don't know them. They go to a different school.
Mhm. But no,
Keep
they
going.
are a favorite to win the Super Bowl this year. because last year was rough. It was the first year the Bills really had expectations, and they did not handle it well. They lost games they should have won. They lost close games, and the vibes were just really off. For the longest time, they were toxic, but they turned it around because basically they leaned all in on Josh Allen. And Josh Allen is he was a fringe prospect who had all of the physical tools coming out of college, but his stats were really bad. Like
Oh,
he played in Wyoming, which is like basically the Jakku of the college football scene. Like he was from nowhere. And there was a famous quote where someone said, if the Bills make Josh Allen work, they will have outsmarted 100 years of NFL wisdom and the entirety of math itself. And the last 4 5 years have been building a system in which Josh Allen can thrive. Uh, and it's paid off because it turns out if you make a healthy, good environment around a guy who is 6'5", is faster than everyone else on the football field, but can also throw the ball 80 yards, you can make a good football team. Um, and the reason, like, basically, once they turned it around, their playoff run last year was kind of miraculous. Like I said, they humiliated the Patriots. And then against the Kansas City Chiefs, they had one of the most exciting playoff games in history. And while they lost, everyone was like, well, it felt like the Bills should have won, and they just had a few unlucky breaks. And basically, that has been the core of the Bills winning the Super Bowl argument. That they should have won it last year. They only added, they didn't subtract from their team. They added this incredible pass rusher named Von Miller, who is has the most sacks of anyone in the NFL right now. They added more receiver depth. Josh Allen will continue to improve. And just overall, they're a team who knows exactly what they need to be. They're a team with a lot of depth on defense where they can basically swap in their entire second unit and still succeed. And they've realized their offense just needs to be, hey, Josh Allen, on any given play, you're either going to throw the ball 50 yards or you're going to run it for 50 yards. You control our destiny. And maybe that's unsustainable. Maybe he'll get hurt, but it doesn't matter if you get that one Super Bowl.
if you win,
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
exactly. Because at the end of the day, for all the talk about like, we want to have a 10-year plan, multiple, you can't think like that. You just need to get the one. Because if you get the one, no one can take that away from you.
Everybody gets one.
Exactly. And that covers basically your primer for every single team. And as we get into the season, we will try to do updates uh, once every 4 or 5-ish weeks to cover the quarters of the NFL season. Again, I really wish they kept it at even numbers. And until that day comes, I'm Carter.
And I'm Calum.
Go throw a damn football, why don't ya?
Woo! Edge.